The cold vacuum of the Kepler 186F system was a graveyard waiting for a ghost. In the silent space between the system's fifth planet and its dull, red sun, the hegemony fleet hung like a shroud. 300 ships of the Vex, sleek, predatory vessels that resembled shards of obsidian, formed a perfect blockade. Their hulls drank the faint light, their forms a testament to 1,000 years of unbroken conquest. At the heart of this obsidian net lay the Imperator's will, a vessel so vast it eclipsed the nearby moons, its weapon emplacements like cities of death studding its surface. Aboard its command spire, Grand Marshal Canaan of the Vex hegemony watched the holographic display, his 4 multifaceted eyes tracking the lone human ship that had dared to defy them. It was a small thing, a frigate by their standards, designated the UNS Stardust. It had been a scout, a pathetic gnat that had blundered into their staging ground. Yet, this gnat had refused to surrender. For 3 days, it had played a desperate game of cat and mouse among the system's asteroid belts, its engines flaring with impossible bursts of speed, its weapons punching far above their weight. It had destroyed 7 Vex destroyers before they had finally cornered it. Canaan felt a flicker of what a lesser species might call amusement. This race, these humans, were new to the galactic stage. They had stumbled out of their cradle system with crude jump drives and kinetic weapons, a brief flicker of life before the inevitable hegemony assimilation. The orders from the Imperator were simple: break them, vassalize them, and strip their worlds of all resources. This single, defiant ship was an insult, a final spark of defiance that had to be extinguished not just with force, but with a statement. All ships, Canaan's voice, a low, chittering growl, echoed across the bridge. Power main batteries. I want its destruction to be a lesson visible from their home system. On the bridge of the UNS Stardust, Captain Eva Rostova gripped the cool metal of her command chair. The ship shuddered around her, a deep groan of stressed metal and failing energy shields. Red lights flashed across every console. The tactical display, a furious swarm of red triangles closing in. Shields at 4%. Lieutenant Commander Jian Li reported from the tactical station, his voice strained but steady. Weapons offline. Life support is failing on decks 3 and 4. Ava stared at the main view screen, at the terrifying majesty of the Vex fleet. 300 ships, a force capable of cracking a planet. All for them. A grim smile touched her lips. They had made the bastards work for it. The Stardust wasn't a warship. It was a long-range explorer, refitted with prototype engines and a few experimental weapons. Her mission had been to chart the unknown, to be the first human eyes to see what lay beyond the familiar arms of the galaxy. Instead, she had found the Vex. The first encounter had been brutal. The Vex scouting party had descended on the unsuspecting colony of Kepler 186F with merciless efficiency. The Stardust, arriving days later, had found only silence and scorched earth. Ava's mission had changed in that moment, from explorer to witness, from scientist to avenger. They had gathered the data, recorded the Vex fleet's composition and strength, and then they had run. But not before leaving a calling card. The experimental Singularity torpedoes had been a last-ditch defense system, untested and unpredictable. Ava had fired all 3. One had fizzled out, but the other 2 had torn a hole in space-time, consuming 2 Vex cruisers in a silent, violent implosion. It was that act that had earned them the personal attention of a Grand Marshal. "Captain," Jian said, his voice softer now, The data packet has been compressed and is ready for tight beam transmission, but there's nowhere to send it. They're jamming everything. Ava's eyes never left the view screen. The Vex ships were beginning to glow, their weapon ports alight with imminent death. She thought of her crew, the 112 souls who had followed her into the dark. Scientists, engineers, explorers, not soldiers, but they had fought like lions. "They think this is the end," she whispered. "They think they've won." She straightened up, her voice ringing with a sudden, cold authority that cut through the bridge's rising panic. "Mr. Lee, recalibrate the primary sensor dish. I want you to focus all remaining power into a single, focused gravimetric pulse. Target the coordinates I'm sending you now." Jian's fingers flew across his console, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Captain, those coordinates are empty space. There's nothing there." "There is now," Ava replied, her eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "Helm, prepare for a full burn. On my mark, I want you to execute a 180-degree flip and fire the main drive." The helmsman, a young ensign with terror in his eyes, looked back at her, speechless. Firing the main drive at a standstill, and at that proximity to the enemy fleet, was suicide. The backwash alone would tear them apart. "Do it," Ava commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. Aboard the Imperator's will, Grand Marshal Canaan watched as the human ship began to reorient itself, turning its engines to face his fleet. A final, pathetic gesture of defiance. He almost felt pity. "Fire," he commanded. 1,000 beams of pure energy converged on the UNS Stardust. But in the split second before they struck, two things happened. The Stardust's sensor dish unleashed a violent, invisible wave of energy into the void, and its engines ignited in a catastrophic, brilliant blue flare. The universe seemed to fold in on itself at the coordinates Ava had targeted. What was empty space a moment before was now a roiling, screaming tear in reality. It wasn't a jump point, it was a wound. The gravimetric pulse from the Stardust had destabilized the very fabric of space-time, creating a temporary, artificial wormhole. And the massive energy from the Vex fleet, instead of vaporizing the human ship, was drawn into the maw of the anomaly. The beams of light bent, twisted, and were swallowed whole. The Stardust itself was caught in the torrent. The backwash from its own engines, combined with the gravitational pull of the wormhole, ripped the ship apart. But as its hull disintegrated, a single hardened data probe, ejected a microsecond before the end, shot through the anomaly, propelled by the dying ship's finally desperate act. Grand Marshal Canaan watched in stunned silence as his fleet's Alpha Strike vanished into nothingness. The wormhole, unstable and fleeting, collapsed as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only the glittering dust of a single human frigate. He stared at the empty space, his four eyes trying to process the impossibility of what he had just witnessed. They had used his own power against him. They had turned their death into a weapon and a message that was now, against all odds, on its way to their home. Far away, in the Sol system, alarms blared across the high orbit command station Vigilance. A wormhole, chaotic and unscheduled, had opened and closed in the blinks of an eye just beyond Pluto's orbit. Before any ship could be dispatched to investigate, a tiny probe, scorched and barely functional, decloaked and began transmitting. It carried the final report of the UNSS Stardust, the records of the Kepler 186F colony's destruction, detailed schematics of the Vex fleet, and Captain Eva Rostova's last, chilling message. It was a single sentence that would ignite a fire in the heart of humanity. They are coming. They are. The news of the Vex hegemony and the sacrifice of the Stardust spread through the United Nations of Sol like a shockwave. Fear was the first reaction. The data was undeniable. A hostile, technologically superior empire was on their doorstep. The Vex fleet was larger, their weapons more powerful, their history one of relentless conquest. Humanity, with its scattered colonies and small, fractious defense fleets, seemed hopelessly outmatched. But fear quickly gave way to a cold, burning anger. The images from Kepler 186F of a world silenced, of human lives extinguished without a word, were broadcast on every channel. Eva Rostova became a martyr, a symbol of defiance, her impossible final act, creating a weapon out of her own destruction, became a legend whispered in every barracks and on every colony world. Humanity, a species that had spent centuries fighting itself, finally found a common enemy. The call to war was answered. In the massive orbital shipyards above Mars, a new class of warship was being born. They were not the elegant exploration vessels of the past. These were beasts of iron and fire, designed for a single purpose: to kill the Vex. And at the heart of this new fleet was a project so secret, so ambitious, it was known only as Project Nemesis. Its flagship was a vessel unlike any other, the UNS Retribution. It was a dreadnought, the first of its kind, a monster of a ship built around a radical new technology reverse-engineered from the data Eva Rostova had sent back. The Vex used energy weapons. The Retribution was designed to absorb them. Its hull was a layered labyrinth of exotic alloys and gravimetric capacitors, capable of soaking up directed energy, storing it, and then unleashing it back at its enemies. It was a mirror, a shield that could become a sword. Its captain was a man as uncompromising as the ship he commanded, Admiral Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a relic of an older time, a veteran of the brutal inter-system wars that had nearly torn humanity apart a century ago. He was old, scarred, and had no patience for politics or pleasantries. He understood only one thing: the cold calculus of war. He had been pulled from retirement, given command of the Retribution and the new Third Fleet with a single or chillingly simple directive: stop the Vex by any means necessary. Thorne stood on the observation deck of the Retribution, watching as the final armor plates were welded into place. The ship was a testament to human ingenuity and desperation. It was larger, more powerful, and more heavily armed than any vessel in human history. Its main weapon was not a cannon or a missile launcher, but the ship itself. He ran a hand over the cool plasteel of the viewport, his reflection a grim, determined specter against the backdrop of Mars. He had read Eva Rostova's logs 100 times. He understood her sacrifice. She had bought them time, and she had given them knowledge. Now, it was his turn to use it. "Admiral," a voice came from behind him. It was Commander Elena Petrova, his executive officer. She was young, brilliant, and one of the few people Thorne trusted. "The fleet is assembled. We've received new intelligence. A Vex Vanguard fleet has been spotted entering the TRAPPIST system. It's a small force, likely a scouting party. But they're on a direct course for Sol. Thorn's gray eyes hardened. How long until they reach the Oort cloud? 3 weeks, sir. And how long until the retribution is fully operational? The engine core is still unstable. The energy capacitor network has only been tested in simulations. The crew is green. We need at least another month of shakedown trials. Thorn turned from the window, his gaze sweeping over the bustling shipyard. There was no time. The Vex were coming, and humanity's first response had to be overwhelming. It had to be a statement, just as the Vex had intended the destruction of the Stardust to be. We launch in 3 days, he said, his voice a low growl. Petrova's eyes widened. Sir, that's impossible. The ship isn't ready. The crew isn't ready. The Vex won't wait for us to be ready. Thorn countered, his voice sharp as broken glass. They think we are weak, scattered prey. They are coming to our home, to do to Earth what they did to Kepler. We will meet them in the darkness beyond our borders. We will show them what humanity does when it is threatened. We will not wait for the storm to break. We will become the storm. His gaze was fixed on something far beyond the Martian shipyards, out in the cold, silent dark where the enemy waited. Prepare the fleet. We are going hunting. The 3 days were a blur of frantic activity. The crew of the Retribution, a mix of raw recruits and hardened veterans, worked around the clock. Engineers wrestled with the ship's volatile power core. Gunnery crews ran endless simulations, and Marines drilled in the cavernous hangar bays. The ship was a city in space, filled with the thrum of nascent power and the palpable tension of a coming war. Marcus Thorn drove them all, and himself, relentlessly. He was a constant presence, his grim face appearing on the bridge, in the engine room, in the mess hall. He spoke little, but his presence was enough. It was the presence of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and had come to embody its unyielding will to survive. On the 3rd day, the UNS Retribution, flanked by the cruisers and destroyers of the 3rd Fleet, pulled away from the Martian docks. It was a sight that brought a tear to the eye of even the most cynical politician on Earth. The ship was a Titan, its dark, angular hull blotting out the stars. It was not a vessel of peace or exploration. It was a promise of vengeance. As they cleared the system and heading for the outer darkness, Thorn stood on the bridge, Petrova at his side. The ship hummed around them, a sleeping beast waking from its slumber. All systems report green. Admiral, Petrova said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. We have a ship. Thorn simply nodded, his eyes on the star chart. The TRAPPIST system was their destination. It was there, in the cold space between worlds. That humanity would make it stand. He thought again of Eva Rostova and her crew. They had given their lives to deliver a warning. He and his fleet would be the answer. The Vex believed in overwhelming force, in the crushing weight of numbers and technology. They were about to learn that humanity had a weapon they could never understand: desperation. A species pushed to the brink of extinction does not fight to win. It fights to survive. And in that fight, there are no rules. Helm, Thorn said, his voice echoing in the quiet of the bridge. Take us out. Maximum burn. The Retribution and its fleet vanished into the black. A spear aimed at the heart of the coming storm. The war for humanity's survival had begun. The journey to the TRAPPIST system was a tense, 3-week whisper through the void. Aboard the UNS Retribution, The silence was a living thing, broken only by the hum of the experimental core and the clipped reports of the crew. Admiral Marcus Thorne had turned the transit into a brutal, relentless shakedown. Drills were run at all hours, pushing the green crew to their breaking point. Systems that had only existed as simulations were tested, failed, and recalibrated in the unforgiving vacuum of deep space. The ship itself seemed to groan under the strain, its metallic bones settling, its spirit awakening. Thorne stood on the bridge, a monolith in the dim combat lighting. His presence a constant pressure on everyone present. He was not a man who offered comfort. He was a man who demanded excellence, because he knew that anything less would mean extinction. Commander Elena Petrova stood at his side, her tablet displaying a cascade of diagnostic data. The gravimetric capacitors are still showing a 5% power fluctuation. Admiral, Chief Engineer Vance says if we take a direct volley from the Vex, the cascade failure could be catastrophic. Vance is a good engineer, Thorne replied without turning, his gaze fixed on the star-dusted abyss ahead. That's why he worries. It's his job. It's our job to make sure those capacitors don't get tested until we are ready. Petrova hesitated, a familiar dance between her duty to report risk and her understanding of his unbending will. The psychological profiles of the crew are trending toward anxiety and fatigue. This pace is what will keep them alive, Thorne interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. The Vex aren't tired. They aren't anxious. They are a force of nature, a tide that has washed over 100 species before us. We will not be the gentle shore that lets itself be eroded. We will be the cliff that breaks the wave. He finally turned to face her, his eyes like chips of granite. They need to learn that fear is a tool, not a crutch. Let them be afraid of me. It's better than being afraid of the enemy. Petrova met his gaze and simply nodded. She understood. He was forging a weapon, not just of steel and energy, but of human will. The Third Fleet, a collection of older cruisers and destroyers, flew in the Retribution's shadow, their crews watching the new dreadnought with a mixture of hope and fear. They were the shield, the escort, but everyone knew the spearhead was the untested Leviathan at their core. When they arrived in the Trappist system, it was to a scene of cold, calculated violence. The system's outer colonies, small orbital habitats and asteroid mining outposts, were already burning. The Vex vanguard hadn't bothered with a subtle approach. They were making a statement, scorching a path of terror toward the inner planets. There were 30 Vex ships in total, led by a cruiser that dwarfed anything the humans had, save for the Retribution. They moved with an arrogant, fluid grace, their obsidian hulls cutting through the darkness like sharks through water. They had formed a loose blockade, taking their time, savoring the fear they were sowing. They haven't detected us, Petrova reported, her voice hushed. The entire fleet was running on silent, their heat signatures masked, their emissions reduced to a bare whisper. They were hiding in the immense magnetic tail of TRAPPIST-1, the system's dim, ultra-cool dwarf star. They're not looking for us, Thorne observed, a flicker of grim satisfaction on his face. Here they expect us to cower behind our home sun, not to meet them in the dark. He pointed to a dense field of asteroids orbiting between the 5th and 6th planets. That's where we'll spring the trap. Commander, signal the fleet. Wolfpack formations. The destroyers Agincourt and Thermopylae will be our bait. They'll make a high-speed burn across the Vex flank, targeting the burning habitats. A rescue attempt, Petrova asked, confused. They'll be cut to pieces. The Vex commander will think it's a foolish, emotional human gesture, Thorn explained, his lips curling into a semblance of a smile. He'll see it as weakness. He'll detach his faster ships to intercept, expecting an easy kill. He'll want to make an example of them. And in doing so, he'll break his perfect formation and follow them into the graveyard. The order was given. The two human destroyers, their engines flaring to life, shot out from the cover of the star's magnetic field. They raced across the void, their profiles small and defiant against the backdrop of Vex superiority. On the bridge of the Vex cruiser, the Void's Razor, Subjugator Xylar watched the human ships appear on his holographic display. He let out a series of sharp, clicking sounds, the Vex equivalent of a derisive laugh. Primitives, he chittered to his second-in-command. Their sentimentality is a fatal flaw. They seek to save those who are already dead. He gestured with a clawed hand. Dispatch the 5th and 6th Talons. Run them down. I want their escape pods for interrogation. Learn the location of their pathetic home world. 12 sleek Vex destroyers detached from the main fleet, accelerating with predatory speed to intercept the human ships. The Agincourt and Thermopylae opened fire, their kinetic rounds bouncing harmlessly off the Vex shields, a futile gesture that only reinforced Xylar's contempt. The chase was on. The two human ships, seemingly panicked, dove straight for the densest part of the asteroid field. The Vex followed without hesitation, their superior technology allowing them to weave through the debris with ease. It was exactly what Thorn had been waiting for. Now, he commanded, his voice a low thunder on the bridge of the Retribution. All ships, engage. The rest of the Third Fleet erupted from the star's magnetic tail. Cruisers and frigates surged forward, their missile ports opening, their railgun batteries glowing with stored power. They fell upon the now exposed flank of the main Vex fleet, unleashing a furious volley. Subjugator Xylar was stunned by the sudden, coordinated attack. He had been so focused on the bait that he had missed the steel jaws of the trap closing around him. His command ship shuddered as multiple kinetic rounds slammed into its shields. Treachery, he hissed, his multifaceted eyes burning with rage. Recall the Talons, all ships. Reorient, eradicate these insects. But it was too late. The battle had been joined, and the chaos Thorn desired had been sown. The 12 Vex destroyers, deep within the asteroid field, suddenly found themselves ambushed. Human frigates decloaked from behind massive iron-rich asteroids, their point-blank volleys overwhelming the Vex shields. The graveyard Thorn had spoken of began to claim its first victims. As the main fleets clashed, Xylar focused his rage on the biggest threat, the human dreadnought. The Retribution was now advancing, a silent, dark titan moving with an unnerving purpose. All main batteries, Xylar screeched. Focus fire on their command ship. I will see it burn. The remaining 18 Vex ships, including Xylar's powerful cruiser, turned their main weapons on the Retribution. A wave of searing, emerald-green energy beams, the signature weapon of the Vex, shot across the void. On the bridge of the Retribution, every screen flashed red. Incoming energy volley. Impact in 5 seconds. Divert all non-essential power to the hull capacitors, Thorn ordered, his voice unnervingly calm. Elena, on my mark. He gripped his command chair, his knuckles white, The crew held their collective breath. This was the moment. Either the theories were correct, or they were about to become a short-lived star. The Vex energy beams struck the Retribution not with a cataclysmic explosion, but with a strange, silent absorption. The ship's dark hull seemed to drink the light. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the decks, a sound of immense power being contained. The lights on the bridge dimmed to near blackout as every spare watt was channeled into the ship's skin. For a terrifying second, the Retribution was a black hole devouring a star's rage. Capacitors at 98% and climbing. Petrova yelled over the rising hum. The system is holding, but it's going to overload. Subjugator Xylar watched, his arrogance turning to utter disbelief. The human ship was still there, glowing with a faint, internal luminescence, absorbing a volley that should have slagged its hull. Before he could process the impossibility, Thorn gave his command. Now. Petrova's fingers slammed a sequence of commands into her console. Discharge authorized. Firing main battery. The UNS Retribution did not fire a beam. It did not launch a projectile. It exhaled. A wave of pure, incandescent white energy. The Vex's own power captured, amplified, and unleashed. Erupted from the entire surface of the Dreadnought's forward hull. It was not a focused attack. It was a tsunami of destruction. The wave of energy washed over the Vex formation. The shields of the Vex ships, designed to repel kinetic attacks and dissipate their own energy signatures, had no defense against this. They overloaded in microseconds. Hulls designed to withstand the vacuum of space vaporized. 3 Vex frigates vanished instantly, their forms simply ceasing to exist. 2 cruisers were gutted, their cores detonating in silent, secondary explosions that added to the storm. The bridge of the Void's Razor was thrown into chaos as the shockwave hit. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and Xylar was thrown from his command throne. He scrambled back up, his mind reeling. What was this? What kind of weapon was this, sir? Our fleet is in disarray. His second shrieked. 7 ships lost. 4 more crippled. On the Retribution's bridge, the lights surged back to full power, the hum receding. The crew stared in stunned silence at the devastation they had wrought. Then, a cheer erupted, a raw, primal roar of triumph. Thorn allowed it for a moment before his voice cut through the noise like a whip. That was the opening statement. Now we finish the conversation. All ships, press the attack. No quarter, no survivors. The human fleet, emboldened by the impossible, surged forward. The battle became a vicious, close-range melee. The Retribution's railguns began to speak, firing slugs the size of shuttles that tore through the already damaged Vex cruisers. Its point defense cannons filled the space around it with a web of flak, shredding any Vex fighters that dared to approach. Thorn was a master of this brutal symphony, directing his ships with cold, precise commands, exploiting every weakness, turning the Vex's panic against them. He drove the Retribution like a battering ram, straight toward the heart of the enemy formation. His target singular and absolute, the Void's Razor. Xylar, his rage now mingling with a cold dread, saw the human dreadnought coming for him. It was damaged, its hull scorched from the energy absorption, but it was relentless. He ordered his remaining ships to form a defensive screen, but they were being hounded and torn apart by the smaller, faster human vessels. The Third Fleet was fighting with the ferocity of a cornered animal. their losses mounting. But for every human ship that died, 2 of the Vex burned. "Target their engines," Thorn commanded as they closed on the Vex flagship. "I want 'em dead in the water." The Retribution unleashed another volley from its railguns. The massive slugs hammered the Void's razor, its powerful shields finally flickering and dying under the relentless kinetic bombardment. One of the slugs found its mark, tearing through the rear of the ship and silencing its main drive. The Vex flagship drifted, crippled. Thorn opened a channel. "Vex Commander," his voice boomed across the black. "You came to our space to bring death. You have found it. Surrender now, and your crews will be spared." The reply from the Vex ship was not a voice, but another volley of fire from its remaining secondary weapons, a final act of defiance. The beams splashed harmlessly against the Retribution's recharged hull. Thorn watched for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Very well," he said quietly. He turned to Petrova. "Absorb it, and send it back." The process repeated, but this time it was more intimate. A final, brutal execution. The Retribution drank the flagship's dying rage and returned it with interest. The Void's razor broke apart, its command section consumed in a flash of emerald and white light. With the destruction of their leader, the remaining Vex ships broke. What was left of their disciplined formation shattered into a panicked rout. 3 ships tried to jump to hyperspace, but their drives, damaged in the fighting, failed catastrophically. 2 others were hunted down and destroyed by the vengeful human cruisers. The guns finally fell silent. The Battle of Trappist was over. The space that had been filled with the light of battle was now a silent tomb, littered with the broken shards of the Vex vanguard. The Third Fleet had won, but the victory was scarred. The Agincourt was gone, destroyed in the asteroid field. The cruiser Indomitable was a drifting hulk. Over 1,000 human lives had been lost. Aboard the Retribution, damage reports were still flooding in. The capacitors were stable, but heavily strained. The hull integrity was compromised in a dozen sections. They were victorious, but wounded. As salvage and rescue operations began, a junior sensor officer suddenly called out, his voice shaking. "Admiral, I'm tracking a single Vex signature, accelerating toward the system's edge. It's a scout ship. Small. Running dark. It must have hidden during the battle. It's about to make a jump." Thorn and Petrova looked at the tactical display. A single red icon was blinking, speeding away from the carnage. They were too far away, and the fleet was too damaged to give chase. Thorn watched the icon, his face a mask of cold fury. He knew what that ship carried. It carried the news of their defeat. It carried the schematics of the Retribution. It carried a warning back to the Vex hegemony. He had wanted to make a statement, and he had. But in doing so, he had revealed his greatest weapon. The Vex now knew what humanity was capable of. They knew they were not facing frightened primitives. The Vex scout ship vanished from the screen, its jump signature a faint ripple in space-time. Silence descended on the bridge once more, but this time it was not the silence of anticipation. It was the heavy, chilling silence that comes after a great victory, when one realizes that the true war has only just begun. The Vex would not send another vanguard. The next time they came, they would come with an armada. They would come not to test humanity, but to annihilate it. The return of the Third Fleet to the Sol system was not the triumphant spectacle the public had been led to expect. The ships limped home, their hulls scarred and pocked, entire sections sealed off and exposed to the vacuum. The Retribution itself was a wounded giant, its dark armor flayed in places, revealing the scorched and twisted machinery beneath. They were victors, but they bore the wounds of a victory that felt perilously close to a defeat. The news channels broadcast endless loops of the fleet's arrival, hailing Admiral Marcus Thorne as the savior of Sol, the iron-willed commander who had met the alien tide and turned it back. Parades were planned, medals were struck, but in the halls of the UN Security Council and the High Command of the Earth Defense Force, the mood was far more somber. Thorne stood before the council in the subterranean command center deep beneath Geneva. The holographic faces of the world's most powerful leaders stared down at him, their expressions a mixture of awe, gratitude, and deep-seated fear. Your victory at Trappist was unprecedented, Admiral, said Secretary General Chen, his voice carefully neutral. But the cost was staggering. We lost nearly a third of the Third Fleet, including two of our most decorated destroyer crews. The Retribution itself requires months of repairs. You engaged an unknown enemy with an untested ship and a green crew against direct advisement. Thorne's face was a mask of cold granite. He hadn't slept in a week, and the lines etched around his eyes seemed deeper than ever. The cost. Mr. Secretary, was the price of survival. Had we waited, had we followed the direct advisement of this council's cautious analysts, the Vex would be at our doorstep. The battle would have been fought over the skies of this planet, and the cost would have been our entire species. The victory at Trappist bought us something far more valuable than ships or lives. It bought us time. And it showed them our trump card, countered General Williams, the head of the EDF. That Vex scout ship got away clean. They now have full sensor logs of the Retribution. They know about the capacitor system. They know how we beat them. The next time they come, they won't be firing energy weapons at us. They will adapt. And they will come with a fleet that makes their vanguard look like a child's toy. I am aware of that, General. Thorne's voice was dangerously low. That is why I am not here to accept congratulations. I am here to request that Project Nemesis be fully funded and accelerated. I want 5 more Retribution-class dreadnoughts. I want every shipyard from Earth to Jupiter churning out cruisers and destroyers. I want a fleet that can meet the Vex not just on our border, but in theirs. A murmur of disbelief went through the council. The economic and industrial mobilization Thorne was describing was tantamount to turning their entire civilization into a war machine. It was a total war footing that would cripple civilian life for a generation. That is an impossibility, Admiral, Chen said, shaking his head. What you ask for would take a decade. We don't have a decade, Thorne shot back, his voice finally cracking with the suppressed fury he had held in check for weeks. We may not have a year. The scout that escaped isn't just a messenger, it's a timer. When it reaches their high command, the clock starts ticking. And when it runs out, everything you know, this council, this planet, our entire future will be turned to ash. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the podium. You wanted a savior. You have a soldier. Now give that soldier the weapons he needs to fight your war. His words hung in the air, a chilling prophecy that no one in the room could refute. The victory parade was quietly canceled. The age of celebration was over. The age of preparation had begun, deep in the heart of the Vex hegemony. On the throne world of Korshan, a planet of black glass cities and crimson skies, the scout ship's data was analyzed. In the Celestial Nexus, a chamber where the Vex leadership convened, the holographic logs of the Battle of Trappist played out in silent, brutal detail. Subjugator Xylar's fleet, arrogant and powerful, was systematically dismantled. The moment the Retribution absorbed and unleashed the Vex's own energy, stunned the assembled leaders into a rare, collective silence. At the center of the chamber, on a throne carved from the fossilized heart of a star leviathan, sat Grand War Master Jakral. He was ancient, even by the long-lived standards of the Vex. His carapace was scarred with the energy signatures of 100 different alien weapons. He had personally overseen the subjugation of 17 sentient species. He watched the final moments of the battle, the destruction of the Void's Razor, and the escape of the single scout, his multifaceted eyes processing every detail with cold, inhuman logic. When the logs finished, a cacophony of angry chittering filled the chamber. Insolence! A fleet destroyed by primitives, one subjugator hissed. We must dispatch the Grand Armada, burn their homeworld to a cinder, another screeched. Jakral raised a single, clawed hand. The chamber fell instantly silent. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried the immense weight of centuries of command. Subjugator Xylar was arrogant. He underestimated his foe. He saw a new species and assumed they were prey. He was wrong. His failure has given us a gift far greater than any easy victory knowledge. He gestured, and the hologram zoomed in on the Retribution. This vessel is their strength. It is a clever design, a direct counter to our primary combat doctrine. They have analyzed our weapons and engineered a defense. This shows a level of ingenuity we have not encountered since the fall of the Signian Empire. He paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. The war against the Signians had lasted for 100 years. They believe this ship is their salvation. Jakral continued, his voice a low rasp. We will make it their curse. We will not engage it on its terms. The Grand Armada will not be sent to a single glorious battle where this Retribution can turn the tide. Victory will not be found in a single stroke, but in 1,000 cuts. He brought up a map of known human space, a small, insignificant cluster of stars on the edge of the galaxy. Their strength is centralized, their command, their industry, and this single, powerful weapon. Their weakness is that they are few, and they are spread thin across their colonies. We will not attack their fleet. We will attack their people. A new strategy began to form on the holographic display. Not a single, massive arrow pointing toward Sol, but a dozen smaller vectors, striking simultaneously at the heart of the human colonial worlds. We will bleed them. For every ship they build, we will burn a world. For every soldier they train, we will extinguish 1,000,000 civilians. We will force their fleet and their champion vessel to race from one fire to the next, never able to be everywhere at once. We will stretch them until they break. His multifaceted eyes gleamed with a cold, ancient malice. This Admiral Thorn, the architect of our defeat, he thinks in terms of battles. We will teach him to think in terms of despair. Prepare the incursion fleets. It is time the humans learned the true meaning of hegemony. Months passed. Aboard the Retribution, docked in high Martian orbit. The work was grueling, Chief Engineer Vance and his teams worked miracles, not just repairing the damaged capacitor network, but reinforcing it, adding redundant systems and increasing its discharge efficiency. New railgun prototypes were installed, and the ship's point defense systems were upgraded with faster targeting AI. The crew, now veterans of an impossible battle, drilled with a grim determination. They were no longer recruits. They were the hardened tip of humanity's spear. Thorn, meanwhile, fought his own battles in the political arena. He had gotten his mobilization, but it was a slow, ponderous thing. The industrial might of humanity was awakening, but not fast enough. He watched the intelligence reports with a growing sense of dread. Vex activity had gone completely dark. It was a silence that screamed of preparation. He pushed his crews harder, knowing they were in a race against an invisible clock. The first blow fell without warning. The target was New Canaan, a thriving agricultural colony in the 82G Eridani system with a population of 90 million. It was one of humanity's breadbaskets, a peaceful, lightly defended world. 3 Vex incursion fleets, each the size of the vanguard they had faced at Trappist, dropped out of hyperspace and began a systematic orbital bombardment. They ignored the small defense fleet, swatting it aside like a nuisance. Their targets were the cities, the farms, the population centers. The news hit the Sol system like a physical blow. The EDF command was thrown into chaos. As they were scrambling to dispatch a relief fleet, another report came in. The colony on Tau Ceti A major industrial hub called Promise, was also under attack. Then another, and another. Proxima Centauri B. Ross 128b. A coordinated, system-wide assault was underway. The Vex were hitting 5 of their most populous and vital colony worlds at once. The bridge of the Retribution was a maelstrom of frantic communication and horrifying images. Live feeds showed cities burning, skies filled with the emerald lances of Vex bombardment. Millions were dying every hour. "We can't fight them everywhere at once." General Williams' panicked face appeared on Thorne's view screen. "The 1st and 2nd fleets are moving to intercept at Tau Ceti, but they're outnumbered. The 4th is en route to Proxima, but they won't make it in time. We need the Retribution." Thorne stood before the tactical map, a terrible, impossible choice laid out before him. 5 fires were raging, and he had 1 bucket of water. Petrova stood beside him, her face pale. "Admiral, which one do we save?" He stared at the map, his mind a cold engine of calculus. New Canaan was the most populous. The loss of life would be the greatest. Promise was the most industrially vital. Its loss would cripple their new shipbuilding efforts. Tau Ceti was where their other fleets were already engaged. Reinforcing them could turn the tide in one battle, but it would take the most time to reach. He was being stretched, broken, just as the Vex War Master had planned. Every choice was a betrayal. Every decision was a death sentence for millions. He closed his eyes for a single, agonizing second. When he opened them, they were clear and cold as the void. The Vex think this is a numbers game. They are trying to break our morale, to shatter our industry. They are wrong. This is a war of will. He pointed to a single target, not the most populous, not the most strategic in a conventional sense. He pointed to New Canaan. "But, sir," Petrova began, "the fleets are moving to Tau Ceti. Command's priority." "Command is panicking." Thorne cut her off. "The Vex are destroying our colonies to draw our fleets into scattered, unwinnable battles. They expect us to try and save our factories and our ships. They expect us to make the logical choice. His gaze was intense. We are going to New Canaan. We will face the largest of their fleets head on. We are going to show them, and the entire human race, that we do not abandon our people. We will make them pay for every innocent life in blood and iron. He turned to the helm, his voice ringing with absolute, terrifying certainty. Plot a course for 82G. Eridani. Maximum burn. We are taking the hunt to them. The Retribution pulled away from the dock, its engines glowing with renewed power. It left the chaos of Sol behind, a lone avenger plunging into the darkness, racing toward a burning world, knowing that for every soul they hoped to save, 1,000 others on distant worlds were being condemned to die. The Vex's true war had begun. The transit to 82G. Eridani was a silent, grim pilgrimage. Every screen on the Retribution that wasn't displaying critical ship data was filled with the ongoing horror of the Vex offensive. The feeds from the besieged colonies were a Dantean nightmare of fire and ruin. On Tau Ceti, the first and second fleets had engaged the Vex and were being systematically torn apart. On Proxima Centauri B, the planetary defense grid had failed, and the bombardment was now merciless. But the worst was New Canaan. It was a world with no meaningful defenses, a soft target chosen for maximum psychological impact. The Vex fleet in orbit was not just bombing it, they were sterilizing it, their energy lances methodically crisscrossing the continents, boiling away oceans and turning verdant plains into seas of glass. The crew of the Retribution watched in a state of suppressed rage. These were not soldiers they were seeing die. They were farmers, teachers, children. The faces of the dead were the faces of their own families. Admiral Thorne allowed the feeds to play. He walked the decks, from the humming engine core to the tense quiet of the Marine barracks, and saw the shift in his crew. The post-Trappist bravado was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. He was honing them, letting their grief and their anger sharpen into a single, lethal point. We're receiving a priority, one dispatch from EDF Command. Commander Petrova announced on the bridge, her voice tight. General Williams's face appeared on the main screen, haggard and desperate. Thorne, what in God's name are you doing? I ordered all available assets to reinforce Tau Ceti. We're losing the battle, and our two best fleets with it. New Canaan is a lost cause. You are to divert your course immediately. Thorne stood unmoving, his hands clasped behind his back. General, the battle for Tau Ceti was lost the moment the Vex chose it as a target. You are playing their game, reacting to their moves, letting them dictate the terms of this war. I will not. This is insubordination, Williams roared. I will have you court-martialed. You are welcome to try. General, Thorne replied, his voice dangerously calm. Assuming there's a command structure left to do so when this is over, my directive from this council was to stop the Vex by any means necessary. I am following that order. The means I have chosen is to break their will, not to chase their pawns across the board. The Retribution is proceeding to New Canaan. Thorne out. He cut the channel, leaving the general's sputtering, furious face to vanish from the screen. Petrova looked at him, her expression a mixture of fear and unwavering loyalty. He will brand us as traitors. History is written by the victors, Commander, Thorne said, turning his gaze back to the star chart. Let's ensure we're the ones writing it. They arrived at New Canaan to find a world wreathed in fire. The green and blue marble Eva Rostova had once charted was now a scorched, angry red. In orbit, the Vex fleet, numbering over 40 ships, continued its monstrous work, oblivious to their approach. They had come out of the system's star, using its stellar radiation as cover, a trick learned from their first encounter. "They're not just destroying the planet," Chief Sensor Officer Kenji Tanaka reported, his voice hollow with horror. "They're installing something. Massive energy spikes from the surface, consistent with deep core drilling and atmospheric conversion." Thorn zoomed the tactical display onto the planet's surface. The Vex were not just committing genocide, they were terraforming, remaking the world in their own image even as its inhabitants burned. It was the ultimate act of imperial arrogance. "They believe they have already won," Thorn whispered. His face was a mask of cold fury. "They are so confident in their victory that they are moving into the house while the family is still inside." He turned to his crew, his voice broadcast throughout the ship. "You have seen what they do to the defenseless. You have seen how they honor the rules of war. There are no rules. There is only us and them. Today, we are not soldiers. We are an answer. We are the consequence. Gunnery. I want you to target their engines. Tactical. Prepare for a full capacitor discharge the moment we are in range. We are not here to fight them. We are here to erase them." The retribution surged from the star's corona like an avenging angel. The Vex fleet, caught completely by surprise, scrambled to react. Their arrogant, methodical destruction had made them complacent. Alarms shrieked across the bridges of their obsidian ships as the lone human dreadnought bore down on them. The lead Vex ships fired, a hasty, disorganized volley of energy lances. The retribution drank them in, its hull humming with stolen power. But Thorn had learned from the Trappist engagement. He wasn't going to give them a chance to adapt. "Fire rail guns," he commanded, even as they were absorbing the energy. "Break their formations. Don't let them concentrate their fire." Massive slugs tore into the Vex fleet, hammering shields and punching through unarmored sections. The Vex were caught between two threats. Their own energy weapons were useless, feeding their enemy, while the humans' kinetic weapons were brutally effective. The Vex commander, a subjugator named Korvash, realized his predicament instantly. "Cease energy fire," he screeched across his fleet's comms. "Switch to kinetic impactors, all ships. Converge and overwhelm it. Ram it if you must." It was the order Thorn had been baiting them into as the Vex fleet abandoned their primary weapons and surged forward. Their formations tightened, becoming a dense swarm of rage and steel. "Capacitors at maximum," Petrova reported, her knuckles white on her console. "Target the center of their formation." Thorn ordered, "Discharge." The retribution unleashed its stolen fury. The tsunami of white energy was even more powerful this time, amplified by the new systems. It struck the heart of the charging Vex fleet, and the result was annihilation. Ships at the epicenter simply ceased to exist. Those on the periphery were crippled, their systems fried, their hulls breached. In a single, blinding flash, nearly a third of the Vex fleet was wiped from existence. Korvash, on his flagship at the edge of the blast, watched in abject horror. The primitive's weapon was even more powerful than the logs had suggested, but he was a veteran of a dozen campaigns. He would not panic like Xylar. He saw the human ship glowing, its capacitors empty, its hull bleeding heat. It was vulnerable. "All remaining ships," he commanded. forward. They have spent their energy. Gut them with your claws. The remaining Vex ships, battered but still numerous, charged through the debris of their fallen comrades. This was the moment of truth. The Retribution had fired its silver bullet. Now it was a slugging match. "All hands, brace for impact," Thorn's voice echoed. "Point defense. Fire at Wilhelm. Evasive pattern Delta. We are not holding the line. We are breaking it." What followed was a brutal, close-quarters brawl in the graveyard of a dying world. The Retribution was a cornered beast, its railguns firing in a steady, methodical rhythm of destruction. Vex ships swarmed it, their smaller kinetic cannons peppering its hull, tearing away armor, causing explosions along its spine. The bridge was a cacophony of damage reports and warning alarms. Hull breach on Deck 7. Fires in the aft torpedo bay. Main power is fluctuating. Thorn was a statue in the chaos. His eyes darted from one screen to the next, processing the torrent of information, his mind a cold chessboard of death. Divert power from life support on the lower decks. Reroute it to the forward shields. I want the Agni missile batteries online. Target their flagship. I want Korvash's head. The battle was not going their way. They were outnumbered, and for every Vex ship they killed, 2 more seemed to take its place, their kinetic weapons chipping away at the Retribution's defenses. The Dreadnought was a Titan, but even Titans could bleed. On the Vex flagship, Korvash tasted victory. The human Dreadnought was slowing, its movements becoming sluggish. Its rate of fire was decreasing. "We have them," he chittered in triumph. "Their power core is failing. Prepare boarding parties. I will take their admiral alive." But Thorn had one last card to play. It was a desperate gamble, one the Chief Engineer Vance had warned could tear the ship apart. "Elena," Thorn said, his voice low and calm amidst the storm. "It's time. Authorize the core tap." Petrova's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Admiral, the simulations showed a 70% chance of a cascade failure. It could detonate the entire drive. The alternative is a 100% chance of dying here," Thorn countered, his gaze unwavering. "Do it." With trembling fingers, Petrova entered the authorization codes. Deep within the ship's armored heart, Chief Engineer Vance and his team rerouted the primary power conduits, bypassing safety protocols and governors. They were tapping directly into the raw to unstable energy of the ship's singularity-based power core, funneling an uncontrolled torrent of energy into the capacitor system. The entire ship screamed. The lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into emergency red lighting. The hum of the capacitors returned, but this time it was a rabid, rising shriek. The hull plates groaned, and arcs of blue energy danced across the view screen. "Capacitors are charging at an exponential rate," Vance yelled over the comm. "I can't hold it for long. The containment field is buckling. You only need to hold it for 10 seconds. "Chief," Thorn said, "to the bridge." He commanded, "Target everything. I don't want a single Vex ship left in the sky." Korvash saw the human ship begin to glow again, this time with an unstable, pulsing blue light. It looked like it was about to tear itself apart. He hesitated for a fatal second, his predatory instincts warring with a sudden, primal fear. Fire. Thorn roared. The Retribution did not just unleash a wave. It detonated. A sphere of pure, chaotic energy erupted from the ship, a miniature nova in the orbit of a dead world. It was not the controlled, directed blast from before. It was a desperate, omnidirectional explosion of raw power. It was the ship's own life force turned into a weapon. The remaining Vex fleet was consumed. There was no resistance, no defense. They were simply unmade, their atoms scattered across the system. The flagship of Core Vash, the closest to the blast, that was vaporized in the first microsecond. The shock wave of the blast continued outward, slamming into the atmosphere of New Canaan, scouring the last vestiges of the Vex terraforming equipment from its surface. When the light faded, the UNS Retribution was still there, but it was a ghost. It was adrift, silent, its hull glowing a dull, cherry red from the immense heat. Power was gone. The bridge was dark. Save for the sparks of shorting consoles, the crew was thrown across their stations, stunned and battered. Slowly, emergency lights began to flicker on. Petrova pushed herself up, a trickle of blood running from her temple. "Damage report," she croaked into the silence. The voice of Chief Engineer Vance came back over the comm, weak and filled with static. "The core is stable, barely, but the entire power grid is fried. We're running on emergency battery, and that won't last long. We're dead in the water. Commander." They had won. They had faced a fleet of 40 Vex warships and had emerged the sole survivors. They had avenged New Canaan, but the cost was immense. They were stranded, hundreds of light years from home, in a crippled ship, in the heart of enemy territory. The silence of space pressed in on them, no longer the quiet of the hunter, but the cold, lonely silence of the hunted. And somewhere, out in the vast darkness of the hegemony, Grand War Master Jakral was receiving the news that another of his fleets had vanished, and his gaze was turning, with cold, analytical fury, toward the single, stubborn light of a ship that refused to die. The silence that followed the battle was heavier than any gravity well. Aboard the UNS Retribution, there was only the darkness, the faint, crimson glow of emergency lighting, and the slow, agonizing drip of coolant from a ruptured pipe somewhere in the overhead. The ship was a tomb adrift in a sea of its own making, surrounded by the vaporized ghosts of a Vex fleet. They were alive, but they were also stranded. A beacon of defiance with its light snuffed out. For 3 days, they floated. Chief Engineer Vance and his crew, working in near-total darkness, performed miracles of triage, rerouting the last dregs of battery power to life support and essential diagnostics. The report he delivered to Admiral Thorne on the darkened bridge was a death sentence delivered in a whisper. The core containment field is fractured. The primary energy conduits are fused slag. The capacitor network is a memory. Vance's voice was a ragged rasp over the comm. "We have maybe 24 hours of life support on battery. After that, we start shutting down sections. Then we start shutting down people. We can't jump. We can't fight. We can't even call for help." Admiral Marcus Thorne stood before the main view screen, which was now just a black, dead pane of glass reflecting the dim red light. He looked at the reflection of his crew, their faces smudged with grime, their eyes hollow with exhaustion but free of panic. He had forged them in fire, and they had not broken. "The Vex know we're here." "Chief," Thorne said, his voice calm. "They will send another fleet. The Grand War Master will not let this insult stand. The only question is when." "It doesn't matter," Vance replied, the despair finally cracking his voice. "We'll be a cold, dead hulk long before they arrive." "No," Thorne said, turning from the glass. A faint, dangerous idea was taking root in his mind. A final, desperate gambit born from the laws of physics and sheer, unadulterated will. They left us a gift. They turned this world into a furnace, and they parked it next to a star. He pointed toward the dim, red glow of 82G, Eridani. We don't need our core. We need a jump start. Commander Petrova, I want you to work with the chief. I want every external sensor, every communications dish, every last scrap of conductive plating we can find rerouted into a single array. Pointed at that star. We are going to build a stellar siphon. Vance was silent for a long moment before a choked, incredulous laugh came over the comm. Admiral, that's insane. The heat, the radiation, even if we could build such a thing. The energy would be so unstable it would either fry us or not be enough to even power the coffee maker. Then you'll have to be very, very precise, won't you, Chief? Thorne's voice was devoid of irony. You have 20 hours. Get it done. As the crew of the Retribution began the impossible task of turning their ship into a giant, makeshift solar panel, a wave of shock and fury was spreading through the Vex hegemony. Grand War Master Jakral stood in the celestial nexus. The data from New Canaan displayed before him. 41 ships, including the veteran subjugator Corvash, had been erased. The human dreadnought, which should have been crippled after Trappist, had instead grown stronger. Its final attack, a suicidal nova of raw power. He had underestimated not the humans' technology, but their capacity for self-destruction as an act of aggression. He is a plague. Jakral rasped, his claws carving grooves into the arm of his throne. He does not fight for territory. He fights to wound. He makes no strategic sense. The Grand Armada is ready. War Master, a subjugator offered. We can be at their location in 4 cycles. We will grind his ship to dust with kinetics. No, Jakral said, his ancient mind seeing the patterns. Thorne was a cornered animal. A cornered animal is at its most dangerous. Sending another conventional fleet was what Thorne would expect. He has shown us his final trick, a ship that can turn itself into a bomb. We will not give it a fleet to destroy. He keyed a series of commands. Summon the World Breaker and my personal guard. I will lead the fleet myself. I will not send another subjugator to fail. I will go to this burning world, and I will personally pluck this thorn from the heart of my hegemony. The race was on. On the Retribution, engineering teams in shielded vacuum suits worked on the ship's outer hull, welding plates and rerouting conduits in the faint starlight. On the bridge, Petrova managed the dwindling power reserves, her calculations precise to the last watt. Thorne waited, a predator conserving its energy for the final strike. On the 20th hour, just as the last of the emergency batteries began to die, Vance's voice came over the comm, triumphant and terrified. The siphon is functional. We are ready to open the floodgates. Admiral, God help us all. Open them, Thorne commanded. The ship shuddered as the unstable energy of a star flowed into its dead veins. Lights flickered on, then blazed with dangerous intensity. The capacitor network, partially repaired, began to hum, absorbing the overflow. It was a chaotic, untamed power, but it was life. Just as a cheer began to rise on the bridge, a new alarm cut through the air. Multiple jump signatures detected. Kenji Tanaka yelled from the sensor station. Massive fleet, Vex! Oh my God! Admiral, there are hundreds of them. On the view screen, now blazing with power, the Vex fleet emerged from hyperspace. It was a sight that dwarfed anything they had seen before. At its heart was a vessel of monstrous proportions, not a warship, but something else. A vast, skeletal structure that pulsed with a malevolent gravitational energy. And leading the fleet was a dreadnought that made the Retribution look like a patrol boat, its hull inscribed with the personal crest of the Grand War Master himself. "They've sprung the trap," Petrova whispered, her face ashen. A ripple in space-time expanded from the skeletal Vex ship, enveloping the entire system. "That's an interdiction field. We can't jump out." There was no hail. There was no challenge. There was only the cold, silent advance of an empire coming to collect its due. Jakral had brought a fleet designed not just to win, but to dominate, to utterly humiliate his foe. Thorn watched the approaching armada, his face serene. He had known this was the only possible end. "They've come for a battle," he said quietly, "but the war was already won. The moment they sent this fleet here to hunt one ship, they lost sight of the larger conflict. They focused all their rage on a symbol." He turned to Petrova, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than iron in his eyes. It was a deep, profound respect. "Commander, your performance throughout this campaign has been exemplary. Your courage has been an inspiration to this crew." "Sir," she asked, a cold dread seeping into her heart, "this ship will not survive this fight." He stated as a simple fact, "But its legacy will. I am ordering a full evacuation. Take the shuttles, use the chaos of the battle as cover, and make for the nearest nebula. Go dark, survive, and take this with you." He handed her a data slate. "It's my final report, and my recommendation for your promotion to captain. You will be the one to carry the lessons of this war forward." The crew stared at him in stunned silence. "Evacuate now." Petrova's jaw tightened. "Admiral, with all due respect, I will not abandon this ship or my commanding officer. None of us will." A chorus of assent echoed from around the bridge. Thorn looked at their faces. These men and women he had pushed to the very edge of existence, and saw not fear, but a reflection of his own unbending will. A rare, grim smile touched his lips. "Very well, then we will give them an end worthy of a legend." He opened a channel, broadcasting on all frequencies, Vex and human alike. "Grand War Master Jakral." His voice boomed across the system, a ghost speaking from a tomb. "You came here for a reckoning. You have found it. You sought to teach humanity the meaning of fear. Instead, you have taught us the measure of our own strength. You can kill us. You can burn our worlds, but you will never break our will. We are the children of Earth, and we do not kneel." He cut the channel and turned to the helm. "Take us in, straight for the War Master's flagship." To Vance, he gave one final and chilling order. "Chief, I want you to disengage every safety protocol on the power core. I want you to feed all the energy from that stellar siphon directly into it. Let's see what happens when you try to force a star into a singularity." The UNS Retribution, glowing with the untamed power of a sun, surged forward. It was no longer a ship. It was a missile, a burning spear of pure defiance. The Vex fleet opened fire, a storm of kinetic slugs hammering its hull, tearing it apart piece by piece. But it did not slow. It did not deviate. On the bridge, Consoles exploded. The hull was breached. But the crew held their posts, their eyes fixed on their target. Chakral watched the burning wreck approach, a flicker of disbelief penetrating his ancient certainty. This wasn't a military tactic. It was an act of cosmic suicide. It was an answer he could not comprehend. In the final moments, as the retribution was about to be consumed, Petrova stood by Thorn's side, the roar of the dying ship a symphony around them. "It's been an honor, Admiral," she shouted over the din. "The honor was all mine, Captain," he replied. The core went critical. The singularity, overloaded with the raw power of a star, collapsed and then inverted. For a single, silent moment, a hole of perfect blackness appeared where the retribution had been, a void that consumed light, matter, and energy. Then it erupted. The explosion was not of fire or light, but of space-time itself. A wave of pure gravitational chaos washed through the heart of the Vex Armada, Chakral's flagship, the World Breaker, and 100 other ships were caught in the wave and simply ceased to be. Their very existence erased from the universe, the remaining Vex ships, their commanders dead, their war master gone, their interdiction field shattered, faltered, their rigid hierarchical structure broke. They had witnessed an enemy who would not just die for their cause, but would weaponize their own annihilation. It was a logic beyond their understanding, a fanaticism that shattered their millennia-old belief in their own superiority. The fleet broke, a panicked, disorganized rout fleeing back into the void. Months later, at a lonely listening post on the edge of human space, a young ensign received a message. It was a fragmented, heavily distorted recording. The last broadcast from the UNS Retribution. He played it for his commander. The words of Marcus Thorn echoed through the quiet station, a final testament from the darkness. As the news spread, the faltering human fleets found new resolve. The Vex offensive, now leaderless and spiritually broken, stalled across every front. The war was far from over, but the tide had been turned. Humanity had been pushed to the very brink of extinction, but in the fires of New Canaan, they had been reborn. They had learned the price of survival, a lesson written in the stardust of their greatest ship and its indomitable crew. The age of fear was over. The age of humanity had begun.